thought it might explode when I pushed the button. I thought no one would put it here if it was going to do that. They wouldn't let me operate an explosive device. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for making it out on a very cold night. All those in favor of warmer weather, raise your hand. Okay, good, thank you. Yeah, so, clearly our speakers here are interesting because we have lots of people here. Otherwise we'd be home trying to stay away from the cold. So before we begin with the presentation, I want to tell you this is a BioArbor event. BioArbor is a volunteer organization. We put these presentations on, and we do that with the help of our steering committee and also our sponsors. Sorry, yeah, it says steering committee. There we go. Okay, and I wanted to. Sorry, yeah. Now our sponsors are laughing at me. Right, so Brinks, Hofer, Gilson, and Leon are major sponsor law firm, so use Brinks. The event itself is hosted here by Spark, and we couldn't do this without the Spark facility. And MishBio is also handles so much of the logistics that make this possible that we simply couldn't put it on without it. And Stephen, did you want to make an announcement?
Thank you, David. Just a couple of quick things. First of all, a note or an e-blast went out this afternoon. You're probably aware that we were asking for any companies, startup companies who were interested in having us represent you at the JP Morgan conference. Applications were due last Friday, but I'm in the holiday spirit and I'm still catching up, having been gone all of that last week. So if you still want to slip me in your executive summary, we could still do that. But more importantly, we got a hold of a special discount to one of the ancillary events, of which there's probably dozens and hundreds of them during the course of that JP Morgan week, for a pitch and VC roundtable session that being hosted by the Georgetown Angels. There's still room for pitches, pitch companies, but then if you just want to attend and network with VCs and others, we can get you a half price discount. But I only have 20 tickets, so first come, first serve. The second thing is just a simple thank you. It's the end of the year. Thanks to everybody for not only participating in things like BioArbor, but for all the MishBio events and activities that we've done this past year. And we're looking forward to a very expanded and exciting 2014. So stay tuned, and we'll welcome you back in 2014. So thanks.
Speaking of 2014, our next BioArbor event will be a co-hosted event with the University of Michigan. It'll actually be at the University of Michigan in early January, dealing with personalized medicine. There'll be an email announcement going out for that about sometime in the next week or so. So please look for that. I'm sure that will be a very well attended event on campus, as most of our, we occasionally do co-host events with the university, and they're usually done quite well. So tonight's event, we're going to talk about assessing the potential for your product, and that's really, well, we had to come up with a title that tried to capture a multi-part topic. Part of that is understanding an opportunity that exists in the market, understanding whether or not your product fits that, understanding who your customers are so you know who to ask, and going out and asking your customers and understanding how to do that to get the answers that you need. And we're fortunate to have our three panelists here. I'm going to do a little introduction to our panelists, and then I'm going to let them make their presentations. We'll have questions and answers afterwards. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can stop at any time. We can do this wholly interactive. We are being recorded, so if you have questions, we try to get people to the microphone. There's a microphone over here, and we can pass it around. So just raise your hand and we'll try and get to you. Okay, so traveling in alphabetical order, David Hartman. Dave is a successful entrepreneur in networking technology and deeply engaged in the Ann Arbor entrepreneurial community. He's currently a mentor in residence at the University of Michigan Tech Transfer Office. He's also an advisor to entrepreneurial programs at the Ross School of Business on campus. He's a director in several local boards, including the Ann Arbor Angels, one of our angel investor groups here in town. Dave and I have had a chance to work together on assisting other entrepreneurial endeavors, and Dave's a great teacher and advocate for that. And Molly Holt. Molly Holt is our token life scientist on the panel tonight. We generally do things life science. Everybody else just happens to not be life science. I believe this is the least life science panel we've ever hosted. So, yes. Well, we'll find out. So Molly has 20 years of experience in biotech and life sciences, healthcare, both as an operator inside companies as well as in market research and also investment. She is a director at Fletcher Spate in their healthcare consulting practice. So she actually looks at assessing market potential for a living. But Fletcher Spate is also an interesting company in that they have a venture capital fund. Molly came here from Boston, so she gets the award for farthest commute. So if we could all give her her reward for farthest commute. Thank you. Thank you, Molly, for coming. I met Molly when we engaged her team to actually assess a product, some product concepts that we were working on at Swift Biosciences. And that went well. It went so well that she bought the company. And Fletcher Spate just led our Series B in October. And Molly's now on my board, so I like Molly. And then Rich Sheridan is another non-life scientist. Sorry, I have to call you out. That's the way it works. He's a co-founder of Menlo Innovations, and for those who don't know Menlo Innovations, it's a custom software design and development firm. Rich is CEO, and your chief storyteller now is your title.
Found that I could actually use. So.
You are very good at that. And he's nationally recognized for not only being passionate about innovative products, but also innovative ways to make those products and innovative ways to build companies. And I've worked closely with Rich when Menlo Innovations have built the user interface for the Accuray flow cytometer. And there was a time, well, I didn't know anything about software. I still don't know anything about software. But you guys didn't know anything about flow cytometers. Yeah, exactly. But we worked really well together because it really wasn't about software and it wasn't about flow cytometers. It was about understanding customers and building products for them. So that was a lot of fun. Rich just authored a book, and I feel like I'm obligated to talk about this, like a talk show, the Tonight Show or something. Joy Incorporated, How We Built a Workplace People Love. And they do actually love that. And it will be in bookstores December 26th, which goes to show you that Rich needs to brush up on his product introduction timing. Yeah, no, we have your mic turned off. Yeah, no, okay. Okay, all right. So that's what they try to figure out what to do on the day after. Okay, fair enough. With that introduction, I'm going to leave it to the speakers to get started and talk a little bit about their experiences in this field, and then hopefully we can have some interaction. So, Dave, take it away.
Great. Thank you for having me, and it's a little intimidating being here with all the life sciences folks when I'm a physical science guy, but I have been involved in the development of a lot of different products, and when I saw this topic, I was thinking back to when I first started and, right out of grad school and ready to go off and build a product. And I went to my cubicle and I started reading. And I started studying and started writing specs. And a month or two later, I had a pretty big spec I had a great spec for a great product, right? And I kept working and working and working, and we built that, and nobody wanted it. And so I said, well, I don't quite understand what went wrong here. I mean, this is a perfect product. I mean, it does everything that we thought it would do. It meets all the specifications. And so later on, I decided I wanted to join a company that actually delivered products, and I went there, and I found that the very next week after I was there, salespeople were promising things that were almost impossible to deliver. And so there's this, so I think one of the sort of an experience just to relate to people that come out of science is, you know, we work real hard to get things right when we're in the academic side. But on the commercial side, you have to get something that's just good enough. And so how do you figure that out? And so one of the things, has anyone here gone through an I-Core experience? Yeah, so there's at least one, but I-Core is a lean launchpad model. And Steve Blank, I see his pictures over there on the screen, and he was in town, and I went through I-Core with him a couple of years ago with one of our projects, and he kept telling the team, get out of the office, get out of the office, get out of the office, build a minimal viable product. And he had a couple of things he said that just stuck with me. One is, the other thing that we have tended to do is to write a business plan around that spec that we worked on for a long time. And it may or may not be a viable business model. And so he likes to say there's no business plan that survives first contact with a customer. And I think that's just a great saying, because it's really true. So when I launched my first company back in the early 90s, armed with some of these experiences, but not all of them, you know, I found a commercial person that I could work with as the CEO, and I became the CTO, which was probably a perfect role for me coming from a technology background. And the first thing he said, well, we need to get a case, we need to go out and talk to some people and get kind of, you know, a study on this and find out if this works. And we did that, and all kinds of things came back. We had endless lists of things that needed to be done. Many more things than were in the spec that I thought we needed technically. And so there's this other thing that I would relate as an experience in this process. Features, 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 you know. If you sit down, you would make an endless list of features if it's a software product especially, but almost any kind of embedded product, which I'm more familiar with. And in that, I would recommend people who have a long list of features, don't just start coding. Don't just add people until you get all the features covered. That's not a good way to start. I would suggest probably being on the technical entrepreneur side, make 3 buckets and put those features into 3 buckets. And the bucket that's most important would be game changers. These would be things people will pay for, even if the rest of the product doesn't work. The second one would be sort of showstoppers, which if you don't have those, you can't really even enter this market or this customer segment. And the third one would be distractions. And I think the distractions bucket is going to be huge if you're really honest about this process. And so maybe relaying some experiences on those 2 points. The first company we did, we worked hard on the product. We did studies, we did commercially. But then we discovered still, you know, we could not find customers that were ready to take that product right away. And this is fairly normal, but very concerning when you're bootstrapping a company and living off your mortgage and things like that. And so one of the things we did was we said we have to do a lot more cold calls in the areas that we want. And it turned out in this particular case, the market was in Japan. Well, this was early 90s. There's no internet. You You don't Skype with people. I mean, you actually just have to buy a plane ticket and go there. And so we set up about 6 calls a day with a variety of people. People that could sell the product for us, which were probably the most important people to talk to, but also users of the product that could tell us whether or not this product actually fit a pain that they had. And also just people to let us operate on the ground in the country. And it turns out through that process, we found our first customer after about 3 trips, 6 calls a day, for a week at a time. And the customer really worked with us and helped define the product. So to the second point, we had some game changers in there, but they probably weren't really very big because we didn't really understand that concept very well. But we were missing some showstoppers, which will trump a game changer if you aren't careful. So if you're familiar with your home router that you get internet from, back in those days, one of the interfaces you had to offer was a coaxial interface, and I apologize for using telecom words, but it was a little round interface that you clamp onto like your cable connector. None of the engineers on the team wanted to put that on there. But we came back and said, they said they have to have it. Well, it's old. We don't do those things anymore. We have a little plug-in jack now. That's a waste of time, money. Anybody can do that. Well, the whole point is, yes, anyone can do it, but we have to do it. And it turns out that little connector won really our biggest account that we ever had in that company, because it was NTT, and what we learned is you can't make mistakes in Japan. I mean, face is very important. And whoever had decided to run coax in every single building in NTT, only to have it obsoleted a year later, was not going to lose face to say they didn't need coax anymore. So we put a coax connector on it. They probably never used it, but we won that account and grew the business tremendously. So it's those kinds of experiences you find when you go into the market, ask the questions of what you need. Just maybe one other point, which is now that you think you have a hypothesis on what your product is and how you're going to deliver it and get somebody to pay for it, which is the actual end game of the whole process. Storytelling. Remember I mentioned, I started with this startup company and they were telling people we could do things we couldn't do from an engineering perspective. Well, this is another interesting part of kind of getting into the market with a product. I mean, you can't be not truthful, but you also can't be too conservative about what you say you can do. And let me give you an example. Now, we put that connector on the box. It worked. We went to a trade show. We could plug things in. We could light things up. Our biggest competitor in those days was Cisco. Cisco came to our booth on day one, saw the connector, saw our sign there that we had this stuff. The next day, they had a connector glued on the side of their box. Okay, they glued it on the side of the box. And this is the problem with gorillas in markets with products, is they can get away with stuff like that a lot more than a small company. And so sometimes you have to sort of say, yes, I can do it if you believe you can do it within the time frame of the delivery of the purchase order that you hope to get. Sometimes you have to take that risk in order to move the ball along. So I think there's stories which are real important, which Rich will talk about much better than me. And then there's kind of a narrative about your key features that I think you have to kind of tune up, and it'd take too long to talk about that. But that's kind of my experience on product. And I think the biggest mistake I see with products that come out of science is the desire to get it right before we begin. and the need to build a minimal viable product with just the game changers, go to the market, and then let the market kind of get the rest of it right. And that's my sort of initial thoughts on that.
Okay. What do I hit to?
You push the green
Green button.
It doesn't blow up.
Okay, so I have spent about 25 years bridging the communication between scientists and business people to figure out how do you make products and how do you figure out what that right product is. And I would say I would add to what you said, David, is that one challenge is that sometimes people think they know what the right product is, but the only person who knows what the right product is the person who's going to buy it. So it's really important to talk to those people and talk to more than one or two, because occasionally there's one or two people who want something that's not what everyone will want, and really understand that market. And that's kind of what I've done in a variety of jobs, both inside companies and product marketing and now as a consultant. So I did, as a consultant, I made a little presentation for you here about assessing product potential. So Fletcher Spate was founded in 1983, and we do basically growth strategy planning for companies. We also have a venture capital arm, and we are delighted to be investors in Swift, amongst other companies. So we work on a variety of projects. One is, does this have a pointer on it or no? So one is doing go-to-market planning, and this is some of the things that I think is really important is understanding what is the market need. I will tell you, I talk to lots of entrepreneurs who think there's a market need, and we can go out and talk to people who are in that supposed market and find out that's not really the need they have. So it's really important to validate that the need is there and understand that. We also do some other growth planning, but I won't go into that right now. So if we think about opportunity assessment and building a business plan, I think the challenge is if you sit in a cubicle or in an office or in your kitchen and dream up a great product that has a great market and write a whole business plan, there's a good chance that you get it wrong because you're not connected with the market. So what I do for a living is actually help to connect people with the market and get that data in an objective way so that people can validate their hypotheses about what people need, how much people will pay for it, and what else is out there. So in terms of the elements for the business plan, the three aspects that affect the product potential are really understanding the market fit. Do you address a need? And understanding what the target market segment is, who amongst those potential people who could benefit from this will actually buy it and why they'll buy it, and understanding what the competitive advantage is. And it's really important to realize there is always competition. Doing nothing is competition. So just because you offer something doesn't mean some people will necessarily buy it. So if you think about the benefit of estimating your product potential and knowing what the market is, it can save a lot of money and a lot of time focusing you away from those distracting things that David will say, which exist in any market, whether you're in life science or automotive or anything else. And looking at the market needs and the segment and the competitive advantage is important. By understanding these things, you can speed your time to market by defining what the right product is from the standpoint of the people who will buy it. What's minimally necessary, what's compelling for them to buy, and what's better than competition. And really understanding what's going to make them change their behavior to use your product rather than what they're using now or how they're doing things now. And this is a big piece of it. So key questions are, what are the unmet needs in the market and understanding the market fit? Who has the problem that we address to understand the market segmentation? A lot of times people will say, oh, we're going to make a diagnostic, and it's a $7 billion diagnostic market. Well, that's probably not the market that you're addressing, because within every diagnostic, you're testing for a pathogen or an analyte or something for a specific condition, and there's very few diagnostic tests that are even selling individually more than 100 million, very few. So when you think about that, you have to think about, well, if you're a diagnostic company, you probably have to have more than one test to make a business out of it if it's going to be a venture-backed type of business. And I guess I would also say that it's important for people to understand the market potential because there's lots of great businesses that are not venture backable, but they're still great businesses. So understanding what the potential is defines your capital strategy, who the sources of capital are, and how capital efficient you need to be. We as venture capitalists see lots of businesses where people have pumped in $30 million to an idea that will never provide a return on that. But if they had understood the market potential earlier, they might have chosen a different development path and still been able to make a business out of it. And then the final thing on here that I put is how important is is it to the market to solve this problem? This really gets to adoption and understanding. We can think about this as consumers. There's lots of products out there that many of us would never buy. Someone made it and they think someone's going to buy it. Sometimes people make something that all of us want to buy and we use it, and it's a really big success. And understanding the difference between how important it is that you can have, a portable water bottle to go with you at the ready versus some other solution to, accessing someone's tap water from the street or whatever. It's going to be something to understand how broad that is, how quickly will people adopt it. But in life sciences, which is where I focus, there's always switching barriers. There's always something. Even if you think about life science tools, and I'm assuming we have lots of scientific types here, if someone has invested in equipment in their laboratory, even if they hate it, there are lots of hurdles to replacing it. It is hard to sell expensive laboratory equipment, even if it is the most awesome thing that will tell them great answers. So it's a long selling cycle, and when people make their business plans, they have to understand the adoption rate because that defines how much capital they need, which defines who they have to go to get to that. So pitfalls, I've mentioned we're going to have a $5 billion market because we're in molecular diagnostics. You need to know who it is. We see this in business plans a lot. We're going to cure diabetes, and there is $465 billion spent on healthcare and diabetes. When you define your market, the dollar metric is what people will pay you for your product, not the economic savings. These metrics are useful for healthcare products when you're selling to the payers and what you can save the system. But in terms of estimating your market, you need to look at potential revenues and where that comes from. The other thing I see a lot gets to price elasticity, and I don't know how many people took economics at some point in life, but I see this all the time. We have an instrument. It's the greatest thing. We're going to charge $300,000, and there's 10,000 labs out there, so we have a huge market. Well, I can tell you there's very few of those 10,000 labs that are going to buy a $300,000 piece of equipment. Period. So they're not thinking about the fact that if you have a product, you can't charge any price for it. I mean, I joke around with my kids about this all the time. You're going to have a lemonade stand. Well, how do you make money? Well, you can't charge people $20 for a little Dixie cup of lemonade because besides your mom, no one's going to buy it, right? And I'm funding the whole operation, so that's a losing deal.
Not for them.
So these are... The biggest challenge, I think, with this is that these overestimations lead to either inability to raise funds, which lots of entrepreneurs know about. But what I see as a consultant and as a venture capitalist is it also leads to poor capital planning. So I see a lot of companies where they raised money and they used a lot of money to get to a point where they don't really have a product, they don't really have a market, and they have to figure out, what do we do? We have intellectual property, how do we make a business out of this? Can we get a return on it? So if you start early to validate that there is a market and understand how you're going to solve those market needs, then you are doing what we call market pull as opposed to technology push, where you're actually using your scientific and engineering smarts to solve problems in the world and address issues that people want to invest their time and money in to make things easier for them. So these are the questions we ask. What are the current practices? And I would say in terms of understanding competition, lots of times people won't change. I mean, someone was talking about catheter companies earlier, and when you have disposable products that are pennies, even if you have a better catheter, it's hard to charge $7 for that. So really, if the solution, it's a whole bunch of issues that people will evaluate in assessing a new product. How established are other products? You talked about Cisco. Really hard. I see this all the time with startups. We're going up against the big guys. We're going to go up against Agilent and Life and Illumina, and how are we going to compete in those situations? And they do things like gluing something on and making it look like they have a product that they don't have. And they can also quickly put together a development team to outstrip probably the resources of any startup. So these are real challenges, is understanding what you have. And sometimes those competitors can also be partners, and a lot of startups are successful in working with those folks to help get their products to market. And then I talked about switching before. There's always some inertia to any product you might use, and understanding what that is. For clinical labs, they have to go through huge validation in terms of making sure that the new equipment will work to answer the question in a regulated environment like the old. And so I think that's important to understand. So this is just an example of estimating a market, and this was for a central vascular product. I think, just without going through the details of it, we looked at incidence of cancer, and then we looked at different cuts on who of those patients would actually use this and how many would use it. And so we got to a sense of what was the relevant number of patients and how many months of treatment would they have, and how much dosing and pricing would that be, to come up with a market estimate. Of course, that's what we call the total available market, which doesn't mean your revenue, because you're going to compete, not everyone will buy. So this is not building a revenue model, but a market model. Now we get to happy holidays. So that, I don't know if I took up more than my time, but I think that I'll leave it to Rich to tell stories about all this.
Yeah, okay, let's see. Well, I think if there's a theme you're hearing from the three of us, number one theme is get out of the building. Go study people, go study them in their native environment. See where your products potentially are going to be used. See how they're going to be used. See who's going to use them. Talk to those people. I'll tell one of Jen Baird's stories, one of my favorite stories from Jen Baird, who was a co-founder of Accuray Cytometers. When she licensed this technology, this flow cell technology, out of the University of Michigan Tech Transfer Office, she went out in the world, started doing discovery, and one of the first markets they were thinking of going after, at least one of the potential markets they were thinking of going after, was using the flow cell to find biological contaminants in industrial cooling fluids. And so this is kind of a big problem. These fluids are fairly expensive. They have to be changed at a certain point. You don't know exactly when to change them. And if you don't change them soon enough, biological contaminants get in there and the workers get sick. So they thought this was going to be a big market. They'd install these machines. They learned that when there were certain plants that had this problem, they got lawsuits. Lawsuits were expensive, and they'd put in these super duper cleaning machines to take care of all this fluid and all this sort of thing, so they thought they were onto something. Jen would go in to talk to these companies, potential clients of such a product, and say, you know, do you have this problem? They go, yep, we have this problem. She says, oh, what do you do about it? They said, well, our workers, if we leave it in too long, the workers get sick. She goes, exactly. She says, what do you do? She says, well, when the workers get sick, we change the fluid. And she goes, yeah, I know exactly. We're going to stop that from happening. And they're like, well, how much would this cost? And she's like, well, it'd be about $50,000 a unit. And they're like, yeah, we'll just let them keep getting sick. And she never saw the pull that you're talking about. She never saw the market pull. Same time, she was out doing discovery around flow cytometry, which I think was probably encouraged by David. And the people, when she would talk to them about building a personal flow cytometer, because the ones that were out in the market were as big as a refrigerator and cost $500,000 sometimes, and they were proposing they were going to build one as big as a microwave that was going to cost $35,000 to $50,000, the response was completely different. The response was, I don't believe you can do that. How soon can I have one? And she saw this over and over and over again, and they knew they were onto something in the flow cytometry market. Now, they came to Menlo to design the software and to build it. And the software is going to be an important part of that product. Jen knew that because the flow cytometer has exactly one button on it. Everything else the scientist was going to interact with was going to be the software, and that's what our team was going to help them do. And so one of the first questions we ask our clients to help them assess the potential of their product in the market is, who does flow cytometry? Quite frankly, I mean, we couldn't spell it. I mean, we couldn't pronounce it. We had no idea what it was used for, but that's not what we're there for. We're there because we're experts at assessing how these things are going to work once they're built, and then designing them for that audience, and then building the software. And so we asked Jen and her team, who does flow cytometry? Those cancer researchers, AIDS researchers, immunologists. Where do they do this kind of work? Can you introduce to some of those people? And we went out into the world and we studied those people doing flow cytometry in their native environment. Holy cow. Anybody ever done flow? Yeah? Wow. Yeah, it's what a horrible device and interface, and thing breaks all the time. The stuff gets clogged up. You have to be practically a mechanic to keep the thing running. It's expensive. You sign up for it, all this kind of stuff. And so we're just watching them, and we're trying to figure out what their goals are. What kind of people are using this? And we saw kind of some interesting things in these core facilities where the flow cytometers were being used. There was a lab director. We eventually called her Emily. Just gave her a name, called her Emily. And Emily basically sat in her office the whole time until the flow cytometer was used. Then she popped out, and she was the one who used the flow cytometer. Brad, eventually called him Brad, her grad assistants could use every other piece of equipment in her lab except the flow cytometer. Emily wouldn't let them near the flow cytometer. Why? Because if you screw up a flow project, you'll set the experimental protocol back by a month, because you're sucking these cells through as a destructive test, and you're not going to, so she's not going to let them near them, because this thing is so fraught with perils, so hard to use, so error prone, she's not going to let them near that. So we were discovering this as we're going out, we're learning about flow, we're learning about what people who do flow need, and we start cataloging the types of people we see in these labs, and Emily and Brad were two of the people we cataloged. I think it was helpful that David's wife was an Emily. And so that was kind of neat. I don't know why we didn't just call her Mary, but it probably would have been too clever to do that. So we called her Emily. But when it came time, this is an interesting moment in Menlo's project sequence. We come to a certain juncture in the product design effort that we call a persona mapping exercise. And what that means is we've collected, along with all the data we've been collecting as we learn about what's going to be needed for such a product, we're also collecting stories about the types of people who use this product. And then we start cataloging them into these personas to describe certain groups of people that have certain characteristics. And probably by the time Accuray came in for what we call a persona mapping exercise, which is where they prioritize these personas against each other, we probably had 15 or 20 of these. And I can tell you, Accuray behaved just like every other one of our clients. They looked at all 20 and they said, yes. And they said, it's got to work for everybody. And we have this little target map thing where you're supposed to put 1 in the middle and 2 in the second ring and 3 in the third ring and all the rest go off to the side. And they said, oh, no, Rich, we're trying to dominate our market. It needs to work for everybody. We're like, whatever. Pick one. And they were like, no, you don't understand. We're trying to dominate the market. We're like, yeah, we understand. You're trying to build for everyone, and it'll end up working for no one in particular. In fact, that's what's out in the market today. Now, the trouble is you get confused because you see big players in the market. You think they're dominant. A lot of people, well, that's not how Microsoft builds software. And I look at them and I say, get over yourself. You're not Microsoft. They play by a completely different set of rules than you do. You want to be Microsoft, go be Microsoft, but man, that's going to be a long road. You want to win today? Pick one. So they looked through and they looked through and they looked through and they said, here it is, Emily. In fact, they said, you make it work for Emily, it doesn't have to work for anybody else. And we said, well, why'd you pick Emily? They said, well, Emily's the lab director. Emily doesn't, Emily is the one who uses the flow cytometer. We said, yeah, we noticed that. We said, we noticed that Brad could use every other piece of equipment in her lab except the flow cytometer. They're like, oh yeah, Emily won't let Brad near it. Like, yeah, we understand. But we pushed Emily aside for a second. We said, let's play a what if game. And we put Brad in the middle. I said, what if we could get it to work for Brad? Do you remember this? Yeah. They freaked out. They started yelling at us. You can't do that. That would never work. Emily would never allow it. Brad, it's too fraught with Brad. We're like, yeah, but what if we designed it to work for Brad? And the cool thing was they started arguing with each other. They actually couldn't even make a decision that day because it was just too heated an argument. They went back to the office. They tell me they yelled at each other at the office, and they came back the next day, and they looked at us and they said, can you really make it work for Brad? We're like, yeah, we've seen these other products. Basically, the typical flow cytometer today throws you out to a Unix prompt to run the software. I mean, woohoo, that's hard. And so we were going to build one that could work for Brad. And so they put Brad in the middle because they looked at us and they said, and this is back to assessing the market potential, they said, look, there's 10 times as many Brads as there are Emilys. Our plan is to build a personal flow cytometer. This isn't going to be in a core facility anymore. It's going to be on a lab bench. So let's make it easy enough for Brad to use. And so they changed their mind, and they put Brad in the middle. Emily was in the second tier because Emily guaranteed Emily was going to look at this thing. She was going to tear it apart. She was going to run experiments through it. She was going to put all her beads through it. She was going to do any standard test she was going to do to prove that this thing was as good as the $500,000 machine she had in the core facility. But once that proving was done, then Brad's going to be allowed to use it. And the rest is history. I think within 3.5 years, Accuray had about 30% of the worldwide market in flow cytometry. And then BD bought them for $205 million. So kind of a cool outcome. But how did this happen? We got out of the building. I just can't emphasize. Jen got out of the building, then we got out of the building. We have people on our team we call high-tech anthropologists. Their job is to study people in their native environment. That's where they went and did it. And I can almost guarantee you, you will never discover what a product needs by asking the people who are going to use it. You actually have to observe them. Because if you ask them what they want, they don't know. It's not because they're stupid. It's actually just the opposite. It's because they're unconsciously competent at what they do, and they can't describe to you what they need. And so you have to do the harder work, and you have to discover it. And the only way to discover it is to see them in their native environment. You can't do a focus group. You can't bring them into a whiteboarded conference room. I mean, I got so many stories around this stuff that we could be here all night, and I'll just stop there because it'd be fun to have questions and answers now.
Thanks. I hadn't thought about Emily and Brad in a long time.
But you remember them, don't you?
I do, yeah. I don't know, yeah, I remember arguing about that. And I did want to make a product for everyone. I learned a lot about how to give that up working with Venlo. Okay, great. So we have open question time. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We have a microphone that we can pass around. I'd like to start with a question following up on what you just talked about, going out and watching people rather than asking people. It is the case that many times you have no choice but to ask people. And I have seen it in my own experience, and other people certainly have experienced it. You ask, you get answers, you write a report, and it doesn't actually reflect what happens. As you say, the most important customer is the one that actually going to buy it. How do you tell the difference when you're out of the office, out talking to people, the difference between, oh yeah, that sounds like a really good idea, and someone who's actually going to pay money at the price you want for the product you intend to build? How do you differentiate? Are there secret questions you ask?
Yes. Go ahead, Steve.
I would ask for a purchase order. The quickest way to get to kind of the answer on that is to ask them to pay something. Now, that doesn't always work in all industries or all markets, but I think that's a pretty quick way. The other thing I would say is I'd like to hear it more than once. I mean, the worst thing would be to develop something for one customer in a market where you want to serve many. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different questions to ask, and we do a lot of market research on this and ask people. And I'm always surprised at people who rank everything super, super high on whatever scale we ask them, and then we say, so would you use it? well, no, I wouldn't use it. And, I mean, they sound like they're just raving about this is the greatest invention ever. So it's really, this is why sometimes it's helpful to have objective people involved in your process, because it's easy to hear what you want to hear. And I find this a lot with different inventors. They ask some right questions, but they don't ask all the right questions, put it in context. So I think it's important to ask essentially for the PO, like, would you buy it? Under what conditions would you buy it? And you get some hesitancy for that. And I guess I would characterize what Rich said and what we're talking about in terms of asking questions. I think that there's different products in terms of how people use them. It's really important to understand the way people work in their environment and to observe that. And that's a really important part of product development. But in understanding the need for something, a lot of those things, especially in healthcare, are very abstract and can be discussed. And we spend a lot of time talking with clinicians and other people about, we have a need for this patient population and we can't treat it. They don't know how the problem is going to be solved. They just know that it is a problem. So I think that a lot of times people are able to talk about their problems in both in life sciences in terms of things they want to measure that they can't measure, and in clinical science in terms of patients they want to be able to treat that they can't treat, or they know that there's not side effects. Right now I'm doing a project on osteoporosis, and interesting enough, there's a lot of good drugs out for osteoporosis, and the biggest issue is patients don't get identified. So we're working for a drug company that wants to figure out what's the next big drug in osteoporosis, but the answer is coming back that, in fact, there's a lot of good drugs out there, and the more important thing is finding the patients and making sure the patients get the prescriptions and take the prescriptions. So sometimes the answer is not what people want to hear, but it's important to ask some questions in that process.
I'm going to just take this in a slightly different direction. By the nature of what we do for a business, people come to us with ideas that they want to turn into software and bring to the market. And so one of the most dangerous personas out there is what we call the mirror persona. And the way it's reflected to us when we start talking to a company that wants to use this for software is they start telling us about their market, their product and everything, and they start saying things like, oh, I think it'd be really cool if it worked like this, and I'd like it to work like this, and I'd really love it if it worked like that, and I really like products that work. And like, are you going to buy this product? And how many are you going to buy? And they're like, oh, well, I would never use this, but this is the way I want to work. Like, great. Stop talking about you. Let's go talk about the people you're going to give it to. It's a huge issue. I mean, quite frankly, and not knowing where any of you are in businesses or companies or products or services or anything like that, you are your biggest impediment to finding out what your customers need. Not only do you have to get out of the building, you have to get out of the way, because you're not buying this. I remember we did a handheld touchscreen diesel motor diagnostic tool, and we did the persona mapping exercise, and the boss came in and looked at the center persona. It's a guy named Gary, and Gary's 3 goals were make it through the day, bring home a paycheck and not worry about money, and not feel stupid when people use terms I don't understand. I mean, those were Gary's operating at the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of need here. And the boss came in and he looked at all the personas, looked at the one in the middle. His team had picked this one. It made sense to us because there's a lot of Garys out there. And he looks down and he goes, man, I'm sorry. I can't relate to this guy. He's not me. I looked at the boss. I said, Dan, how many of these diesel motor diagnostic tools are you going to buy? He goes, well, none. I don't do this kind of work. And he says, and then I said to him, well, then why would we design the product for you? He goes, yeah, I know. That's a part of your process I'm still struggling with.
Okay, score 1 for the storytelling. Do we have any questions? No? Well, I have another question. One of the story of Brad and Emily, one of the conflicts we had was that Emily was the only one who could authorize to buy something. Brad couldn't buy anything. But if we really wanted to tap into the market, we needed to be able to get something that Brad could operate so that Emily would buy it so Brad would use it. How often do you run into, and how do you deal with the separation between those who make decisions about purchases and those who evaluate something for purchase and those who actually use it? So something may end up in the hands of a nurse, but it's decided by a committee of doctors who don't even work on that floor, but are making a decision in a risk assessment office at a hospital. We wanted to satisfy everyone. How do you deal with that?
So usually, and in your case, in Acury's case, I still think of David at Acury. In Acury's case, this was the case. Emily was going to be the one who authorized the purchase, and Brad was going to be the user. So Emily was still in the persona map. And so there were features that had to be in there for Emily. There were things you guys could tell us that Emily would absolutely have to have this product to do, even though Brad wouldn't do that every day. And so the only question we have, and this is a design question, but is also a question where product design meets product management. This is really important, because if your product management ideas and your product management philosophy doesn't meet your product design philosophy, you're going to be putting out brochures that say one thing and delivering a product that says something different, and that's usually a formula for long-term disaster in a marketplace, because your salespeople are telling one story and they're gluing stuff on the back of a box, which is actually a clever strategy for a trade show, but not necessarily if you're delivering a product, but unless you really don't believe they're going to use it. But so we typically will find that the person making the purchasing decision is also in the persona map, but the primary user is not that primary purchaser, or often, most software is never bought by the people who use it. I mean, we think of our home computers and that, yeah, we buy software for our own computers. But in business environment, almost never is software bought by the people who are going to use it. It's just foisted on the people who are going to use it. So what we'll do then is, in a design decision process, if we're going to add some feature for Emily, the question simply becomes for us, how do we add this feature in for Emily in a way that doesn't interfere with Brad's use of the product? Could be an advanced tab, could be a lab director tab on the screen, and when Emily pushes that, she goes into a world that only she understands, and Brad never goes there. It's all out of the way. Emily's not offended by putting a special button on the screen just for her, because she actually appreciates that. And so the idea is to design in such a way that matches the product management needs of the product.
I would say that what you described exists for every healthcare product, because fundamentally, healthcare products are used by the patient, decided on by the docs or the medical providers, and paid for by governments or insurance companies. And when we look at healthcare products, every time we do this, we have to look at all the stakeholders and understand the resistances to adopting different technologies. This happens a lot when you're dealing with hugely revolutionary technologies that are going to change the specialist who does something. We see this in diagnostics now with pathologists and molecular stuff going on. There's huge changes. I mean, now they're talking about at pathology meetings, like if you don't learn something about DNA, you're going to be completely obsoleted. This is like radiology 20 years ago when PACS came in and people were moving to digital radiology, or interventional radiologists. Boy, the surgeons were pretty ticked off about that. But you start looking at these things. When you make a product, you have to understand the dynamics of the whole ecosystem. And in healthcare, it is always complex, because there are very few healthcare products that are purchased, used, and decided on by all the same person.
I don't have too much to add to that, but one thought that's occurring to me is that, you have the users and the choosers and influencers, but in the early stages of the first product and the first sales, I mean, I'm always trying to find who will pay a premium for it to some extent, because what I really need is a high margin on that product to kind of build the next group of them and make good use of cash. And so I'm usually looking in there for one more ingredient, which would be the strategic element of the sale with the customer. And sometimes the most excited people are not necessarily the strategic ones to sell to. And so, that even is like another whole layer of the company, and it's difficult sometimes to sell at that level, and you can't start there. But it's another ingredient, I think, to think about.
Yeah, question here? Oh, the guy with the mic wins.
I'm having a little trouble trying to formulate my question here, but I just went through the I-Corps program in July of this year, and when we were talking to all of our potential customers, we were really told not to lead them, not to talk about the product. So it was kind of what's your pain points within your working space. And as an engineer with a really cool product, I wanted to talk about the product, but we did a good job of pulling back, and now I've kind of taught myself not to talk about the product. Where do you make that transition between trying to find out what people really need to address their needs in their workspace so you can develop that product for them? When do you transition to actually trying to really start to promote and sell the idea that you're coming up with? And maybe I think you've kind of answered some of this in the last question or the last round, but as an engineer, that's kind of tough for me to handle, to make that transition back and forth between not talking about the product and really trying to push the technology and the features.
Can I take a shot at a couple thoughts on that, which what we're really trying to find is the customer pain. May not be related to the features. It may be related to the way they deliver the product to the customer, and I'm not completely answering your question head on there, but I think, you need to, and I think one of the reasons you don't just go to features at the beginning is you really want to listen and find out what the pain is. The pain may be even just a personal, emotional thing about their reputation in the market and they're having low quality. It could be you don't need any new features. You just need to deliver them something that solves that problem. So I think that's one of the reasons that you go in and basically listen at the front end. But once you've got that pain, now you know what the real features are. It may not be related to the actual technology. So I think once you know you have that sort of business model for selling, then I think you can go to the story.
I think it depends on where you are in the evolution of your product, your company, and your capital needs. So there's no right way to do it. I mean, there are companies and, these guys work with a lot of software. There's lots of software ideas that basically people sell before they've written a line of code. So there's a lot of businesses that you can basically pre-sell before you have a product, and you define it with that one customer, and you hope that that one customer reflects maybe something that other people want too. So there's not a simple answer about when do you start promoting it, and that depends a lot on capital, time, and options that you have. In terms of talking about product features or what idea you have, I think it's really important to understand what people's needs are, what their current practices are, and how they work first. And then you can test ideas like, well, what if you did it a different way? How would that work? And we have a structured methodology for testing out product concepts. We do a lot of product concept receptivity testing, but we always start with, what do you do today? What do you like about that? What don't you like about that? How does it work? And get people talking about it. And then when we talk about, our client has a product idea and this is kind of how it will work. Well, what do you think about that? What concerns do you have? What questions do you have? And we work with a lot of scientists and clinicians, so there's always lots of questions. And a lot of times those questions come back and they're really helpful for a product development team to iterate and figure out what the next thing is. I think when you go further, as you get to prototypes, it's really important to have alpha testing, beta testing, where it actually gets in a small number of people's hands and you can be with them, just like Rich is talking about, experiencing what they're experiencing to figure out, is it getting close to addressing it? And sometimes there's things that weren't anticipated in the workflow that only become clear when it's sitting in someone's lab or something like that. So it really, there's not a formula, and it may be different for companies addressing the same market need depending on their circumstances. But I think that it really depends on what you already know and where you are, and in terms of promoting it depends on really your need for revenue and whether you're going to be able to convince people to buy something before it's all the way made.
One last question then.
The pharmaceutical industry companies have huge problems that kind of stick out like sore thumbs. The conditions that now University of Michigan is in a facility that used to be owned by Pfizer. I have a solution, an approach to solving those problems, and yet find it very hard to gain traction, perhaps in part because the FDA largely controls clinical trial designs. Any suggestions about how to gain traction under those sorts of conditions?
Is your idea about clinical trial design?
It's a measurement technology that enables new clinical trial designs.
So in this case, you have to define the stakeholders. FDA is clearly a stakeholder if you want to operate in the U.S. environment. So I think that it's a matter of looking at, we talked about it with different terminology. Rich has a great way of giving names to each of the different types of people. But thinking about, David talked about it as a showstopper. In your case, FDA is the showstopper. And you're not alone, because everyone in healthcare would probably complain about that at one time or another. But that is something you're going to have to figure out about how you either engage them or work with them, or how you find innovative pharma partners who want to try an alternative approach, or working with the CROs. So there's a lot of potential people that are involved, and you have to think about the industry structure. And if it's something that's going to restructure an industry, that's why I had adoption on my slides. Like, the time to adoption can be quite long. If we think about personal computers, when we first got personal computers, we used them as typewriters that hooked up to a printer. It took a generation to see the productivity gains in our economy from all the ways you could use a computer, and we're still evolving with that. So when you have something that's really revolutionary, it may not happen overnight in terms of the adoption, but really you have to map out the industry and the stakeholders, and who stands to gain and who stands to lose.
I'll reflect on an Accuray story. There was a time, as we were advancing the development of the software and the hardware was developing, in flow cytometry there are certain standard bead tests that you run to produce a certain kind of result, and everybody compares every flow cytometer's results to that standard bead test to see what's coming out, because everybody wanted to make sure your device was the same as everybody else, which sounds like it's antithetical to innovation. Well, as the hardware and the software is developing, the graph plots, the dot plots that were coming out were different. And we're kind of scratching our heads, hardware-wise, we're kind of scratching our heads software-wise. Like, how can this be? I mean, we're looking at everything. And then all of a sudden we realized that the Accuray device was more precise than anyone that ever been on the market before. And of course, the inner engineers in every one of us were like, this is good. Not to the marketing team. They're like, no, make it the same. We're like, no, but it's better. Make it the same. But they'll value this. Make it the same. And the statement I came out of that lesson, and I think maybe, Kurt, this could apply to you, I don't know, is there are moments in innovation history where you have to prove you're the same before you have a chance to prove there's value in the difference. Because, if you want to really read a depressing book about innovation, go read Everett Rogers' book on the diffusion of innovation. It talks about the fact that the British Navy ran an experiment that proved that lime cured scurvy. Limes cured scurvy, right? They ran the experiment. They ran 3 ships across the ocean. 2 ships had lime. Two ships had limes, and the other one didn't. And half the crew on the 3rd ship died on the way across the ocean. They had to stop the experiment and transfer crew over. They proved beyond a shadow of doubt. It took the British Navy 300 years to standardize on putting citrus on ocean-going vessels. 300 years. So I just would suggest to you that it might be, is there a way you could use your technology to show that doing clinical trials the same way today, maybe slightly more efficiently, slightly less expensively, even though you know behind the scenes there's great value in the difference. I mean, I can't imagine the first time somebody put a high-powered telescope up and said, oh, that thing we always thought was a star, it's a galaxy, which was kind of what was happening with Accuray.
And I think FDA won't take 300 years, so I would be more optimistic about that. But there's a lot of changes in terms of clinical trial design, so it's a matter of connecting with the community too to brainstorm on it.
There's Project FDA at the Manhattan Institute with a book that just came out recently that gives hope in that regard.
Okay, so thank you all to our panelists. If everyone could join me in thanking our panelists. And thank you all for coming, and I hope we'll see you at the next BioArbor event in January. Stay warm.
Great to meet you. Let's hear your stories.
We're all going to dinner.